I am an atheist, and I have always been skeptical of the paranormal. Aside from being the most disturbing thing that I have experienced, this encounter has turned my model of reality upside down. I was on the bus with my friend Veronica at around midnight. One of us mentioned that I was headed to Waterfront. She made a joke about how we shouldn't talk about where I was going on the bus because I would get stalked. I laughed and joked about that a little too, but I felt slightly uneasy. And this is where I believe the experience began. I remember there was barely anyone on the bus. I saw 4 men chatting in front of us though. At the time that I'm writing this, a few hours after it happened, I don't remember seeing anyone else in the bus. I got off the bus and Veronica walked me to the SkyTrain station. I remember paying for my ticket and calling her as soon as I paid to jokingly complain about the fact that they had raised transit fare by 5 cents. We then chatted for a bit. I went down the stairs to the platform for the SkyTrain to Waterfront, and a girl was sitting about 15 feet away from me. I immediately recognized her from the bus. Though, thinking back, I can't really recall if I actually saw her on the bus or not. I don't know how she got from the bus stop to the SkyTrain station without me seeing her on the way, but I didn't think to question that at this point in the story. From what I can remember, she looked about 9 to 15. Keep in mind, it was past midnight, and she was alone. She was small and slim, and her hair was cut into a perfect grey bob. It actually looked more like a shiny hard grey helmet than hair. If it was a helmet, it must have been a wig. I don't remember anything about her facial features or clothing, despite the fact that I only saw her a couple of hours ago, and at that point in the story, stared at her intently for 15 minutes. I do remember though that she had an alternative sense of style, and I think she was wearing either a leather or denim jacket. I stayed 15 feet away from the bench that she was sitting on. There was just something about her that was disconcerting and made me mildly uncomfortable. When the SkyTrain came, instead of walking through the doors of the SkyTrain compartment straight in front of her, she walked the 15 feet to get into the same compartment as me. I remember feeling a little weird about it. I didn't look at her while I was on the SkyTrain at all though. And this is where it gets really weird. After the SkyTrain pulled into Waterfront Station, I got off it to get into the C-Bus. When the SkyTrain arrived, the C-Bus was leaving in 20 seconds, so I ran to catch it. Only one other person was running to catch it with me. When I sat down, the girl with the grey hair that was sitting a few rows across from me, she was staring straight at me. I immediately recognized her. And I don't know how the hell that she got to the C-Bus from the SkyTrain station within 20 seconds before me. I mean, without me even seeing her. As soon as I saw her, I went from relief that I made it into the C-Bus to being on the verge of tears. And this is the part that makes me cry when I think about it. Her eyes were completely black. Her facial expression was inhumanely blank, like a robot. And she was staring straight at me. I'm not exaggerating when I say that it wasn't human. It was so wrong and unnatural. I've never seen or experienced anything like that in my life before. All of a sudden, its face stretched into the most horrifying evil smile. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Well, I was holding back tears at this point. But I couldn't stop thinking about how the hell it got from the SkyTrain to the C-Bus without me even seeing it. The C-Bus takes 15 minutes to get to the other side of the water, so I just sat there watching it for 15 minutes. I couldn't have hallucinated it being there for 15 minutes straight, could I? When the C-Bus pulled in, I waited to get off at last and didn't see her on my walk home. Though I was beyond terrified for the entire walk. The strange thing is that the more I try to remember its physical appearance, the more hazy it gets. All I really remember is the helmet-like grey hair, pale skin and black eyes, and the blank stare morphing into the most disturbing smile I've ever seen. I remember it was dressed in alternative clothes similar to mine, and what's creepier is that my hair is grey too. It was almost like it was mimicking my appearance or something. But it totally lacked the thing that makes humans human. It even lacked the thing that makes animals seem alive. It's really hard to explain, but like I said, it was just so unnatural. This whole thing is just really scary and confusing. Why is it following me? Was it a hallucination? And if not, what did it want? When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad decided that we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, any sort of fishing, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are just way too similar, and if you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time that he and I are done playing several dozen rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyways, Dad decided to take me to this river up by our new house that they had just finished building. My mum and my brother stayed behind as we traipsed through the dark woods. Now, my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about 1.5 miles from my family's property, over massive fallen trees and stumps that I easily tripped on, not knowing the lay of the land. My dad, he merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. He didn't say it just like that, but something along those lines. Like some stereotypical cowboy out of an old Wild West film. I blamed the fact that I didn't know the area as well as he did, and it just spiraled downhill from there, and arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down the river, my father critiquing my less than Christian lifestyle while I criticized his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. Anyway, when we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward, tense silence as we got our gear out. I knew that this fight was far from over as I sat down on a fallen stump and shivered my ass off. I had lived in a warm climate for over a year, and honestly, coming out here was probably him pushing me for even leaving the Pacific Northwest. We refused to talk to one another as our lights danced across the water, when my dad suddenly stood up, his light landing on the other side of the river. There, on the other bank, stood a man looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans for the most part, looking pretty average, if you counted the machete hanging from his belt. My dad snapped at me to start packing all our stuff up, and so I followed his command as my dad started shouting at the man across the river. Their conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white-capped water, but I could see the man making agitated sweeps with his hand every time I dared peek. Their voices grew, and my fear grew with it. My father has never been one to carry protection in the woods, hence why I was born. This man was armed and possibly dangerous with that machete, and while we had the river between us, it was shallow and had plenty of places to cross. And even if it was snow runoff, I had no doubt that this man could be behind us in mere minutes. Had we wandered onto his property by mistake and just not have known it? "Drop the gear and let's go." My dad snarled at me as I took one last look to see the man starting to walk into the water, his hand fitting against his weapon. My dad put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods towards our house. My dad is an ultra-marathoner. He runs like it's going out of style, and my mostly out-of-shape self probably wouldn't have kept up if I hadn't have been so terrified. I couldn't hear if the man was coming after us, my heartbeat being so loud in my ears, but I followed my dad so closely that I almost ran into him several times. Finally, we found our road and made a break for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had the doors locked and was keeping a vigilant watch at the windows, making sure no crazy men with machetes were creeping up on our house. Finally, when he figured that there was no guy, we sat down and began to talk about our experience with my mum. We avoided the part where we had been arguing, but we told her everything else. We went to bed without apologizing, and I honestly felt horrid. The next day, with the only gun he owned, my father and I walked back into the woods after calling the police. They said that there was a guy who did enjoy scaring people off of the forest land in the area, and that we shouldn't be too concerned. Feeling a bit sheepish, we went back to the place where we had left our gear, both of us apologizing for our lackluster behavior the night before. When we returned to what we believed to be the spot, we saw that our fishing poles had been bent, and all the line had been draped from tree to tree, and the tackle box was gone. I still don't know what that man wanted to this day, but the fact that he was out there in the middle of the night with a machete nonetheless makes me think that he was up to no good.